Shalom to the elect. I'm going to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, and double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. So this is your brother Samad coming to you with another lesson through the Spirit. I'm just leaving work. I just wanted to share a quick lesson talking about always remember to examine whether you're balanced in the spirit and whether you're in the whether you are in the faith. Excuse me, because it's easy to get lost, in the sauce of this world. Going to work, grinding, paying bills, rinse and repeat, amongst many other things, and even just getting in, and sometimes even just getting in the cycle of camp. Going to camp, maybe just doing your lessons, and you're not really like fervent in the spirit, because you can have a routine and it's not necessarily much fervency in it. So pretty much the point is just to try to make sure you maintain that fire within you. And from what I've learned from my experience, is the best way to keep the fire lit within you obviously is prayer. That's probably the most important thing. Prayer, constantly praying and asking the Most High to keep the spirit on you, to keep the fire lit. But two other things. Fasting, so it kind of go hand in hand with prayer. Fasting will keep you in check, man. Fasting will keep you in check. One, because fasting, it puts you in a mental clarity, a state of mental clarity, where you're able to really you kind of use that hunger as energy and fuel for, because once you go into ketosis, the ketones, they feed your brain, and your brain thrives off of it, and it's energy without fogging the brain, contrary to like glucose, if you will, and eating with digestion and shit. But going into that fasting, it gives you that mental clarity, which will allow you to be able to just think better, and then also just to go along with that, meditating more. People always in the world like to talk about meditation and stuff, and for a while I kind of thought it was like gimmicky, but once you try it, you really realize it's actually the truth. And it's not meditation like you're sitting there, you got certain music playing in the background, and you got certain incense burning, and you're not like that. Meditation is in you sit in a room by yourself, a silent room. This is the key. Sit in a silent room by yourself. Phone either in another room, or do not disturb, or silent. And the only thing you should have with you is a pen and a notebook, something, or a journal. And you sit there, and maybe you got your phone just to set a timer or whatever, and you'll sit there for literally 25, you might, it doesn't have to be that long, but 15 to 30 minutes. And you just sit there in thought, silence. You just think. You just sit there and think and think and think and think. Don't talk to yourself, just thought. And then you'll just have a clear mind. You'll be able to really, usually around like the 15 to 25 minute mark, you'll really reach that state of clarity where you start coming up with great ideas. You really start seeing things for what they really are, especially within yourself. So you have to do that. And then imagine if you pair that with fasting. Imagine pairing that deep meditation deep within a, say, 16 plus hour fast, right? You're 16 hours within your fast, or just right before you break your fast, after like 24 hours or however long you do your fast, right before you break your fast. If you're doing a 24 hour, get yourself to that 20 to 22 hour mark, and then for an hour, just go ahead and sit in silence, or not even an hour, 30 minutes, sit in silence and allow your creative juices to flow. Right? And then that's another way to keep yourself in the spirit, right? Because the fasting paired with the deep meditation and thought, which is going to help you come up with better ideas for lessons and topics to study, And then that brings me to the second thing that you can do or the third thing you can do other than prayer and fasting, which is learning new topics. When you dive into a new topic, it forces your brain to work hard because you're learning something new. You're diving into a more deeper topic or something that you're not too knowledgeable of, which forces you to activate your brain to actually learn and understand and comprehend, which then is going to help fuel the fire. And that's another thing that you can do. So, just try to, put these practices into your routine weekly. It doesn't necessarily have to be daily, but weekly, to help keep your spirit fire, because we have to look at the parable of the virgins, right, with the lamps and the oil. Right? The foolish virgins, they didn't prepare themselves enough, right? They didn't count the cost. They didn't measure themselves well enough to know how much oil that they needed, nor did they know how to conserve the oil. So not only do we have to make sure we measure how much oil we actually need, but we also have to measure how and learn how to conserve our oil, which is really going into balance. Not burning yourself out, but also not being too far into the world either. So that's pretty much the point. We want to be like those wise virgins, right? When we had the opportunity to go out and buy more oil, we go out and buy more oil just to make sure we have enough. And then when we don't need our lamps to burn, all right, we trim our lamps. There's no need for our lamps to be burning right now, so let's trim them, let's cut them. All right, that's going into that balance, knowing when to separate yourself from folly, and knowing when to involve yourself in folly. Right? Folly isn't necessarily sin. All right, folly is just folly. Literally, watching a movie or a TV show can be considered folly. If it's not conducive and beneficial to the spirit, then it's folly. It's vanity, right? It's meaningless. Watching a TV show, some brothers, watch different Marvel shows, or some brothers are in anime, some brothers are in reality TV. Shit, that's your thing. If it ain't going off, then it ain't going off. So it's still folly. So you got to know when to put yourself in folly and when to kick yourself out of folly. Right? Sometimes you got to feed the flesh too, man. You got to feed the flesh. But we feed the flesh with we feed the flesh in righteousness, though. We don't just feed the flesh with wickedness and lust and things that are adverse to our law, against our law. We feed the flesh with, sometimes you need rest. All right, that's feeding the flesh. Just physical rest. You got mental rest, but just sleep, maybe sleeping in an hour longer, or sleeping in an hour longer, or just shutting your brain off. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of what it is when you dive into folly. That's essentially what it is. It's just you shutting your brain off. Watching some essentially mindless entertainment. You know what I mean? Just because most of the time, our minds are working all day long. Some brothers have jobs where they really got to utilize their brain. You studying, you listening to lessons, you taking information in, you always examining. Sometimes you sit on the couch and throw an action movie on, or a comedy, and then you just chill out, shut your brain off, drink some wine, fall back, chill. All right, but all these things are how you keep yourself fiery, believe it or not. Sometimes trimming your lamp will help preserve your fire. All right, and that's what it's about. It's not about having the brightest fire all the time. No, it's not realistic. Sometimes the fire has to come down, and then it lights up when it needs to, and then it mediums itself, and then it goes low, and then boom, boom, boom. And that's the balance of this truth. So find that balance for yourself, work towards it, and Lord willing, the Most High be with you and keep your brother's spirits and your sisters as well. Until next time, shalom.